I'm Warren Dutton. I first came to Papua New Guinea as a cadet patrol officer in 1962, and I've enjoyed myself in Papua New Guinea ever since.
Can you tell us about your early years before coming to Papua New Guinea and what motivated you to serve as a patrol officer?
Yes, I always wanted to be a politician. When I left high school, as a matter of fact, I was wanting to be Prime Minister of Australia, and at that stage the route to becoming a politician seemed to be getting a law degree first. So I started studying first arts, then law at Sydney University. But unfortunately I didn't study as well as I should, and after 5 years of studying there, I had been failing too many exams, mainly because I was playing good third grade rugby for Sydney University and chasing too many girls, not catching any at all actually at that stage, but I just wasn't studying. So I knew I needed a break, and the advertisement for patrol officers, cadet patrol officers, was in the paper. I applied and I got the job up here.
Right. Okay, tell me your earliest memories about coming to Papua New Guinea.
Well, one of the earliest memories was as a cadet patrol officer. Philip Baraga was the only Papua New Guinean cadet patrol officer in our team at that stage. There'd been junior patrol officers like Noel Levy and other people before, but Philip was the first that had matriculated, and so he was in the ranks of cadet patrol officers. So he was one of our group of 24, and the first village I visited when we came to Moresby was actually Philip's village in Gubba Gubba. We all went down there as part of our orientation week and that sort of thing. So my motivation was to come here for 2 years, tighten my bones and go back and finish my studies. But that didn't happen. I'm still here.
So tell me about those early days. What were your postings and where did you serve?
Well, I served only in the Western Province because at the end of our orientation course we were each asked where we would like to go, and everybody said the Highlands or the islands, and I said, send me where you like. So they sent me to the Western Province because at that stage the Western Province and the Sepik Province were considered punishment postings. Now, I don't know what I'd done wrong in my 3 weeks in Port Moresby, but I think it was probably just because I was easy. They didn't have to force anybody to go to the Western Province. So that's how I ended up in the Western Province. I was there working as a cadet patrol officer and subsequently a patrol officer for 2.5 terms. And at the end of each term, they wanted to transfer me to a different district, as they were then. And I said, no, I haven't learned enough about the Western District yet, leave me here, sort of thing. And then, of course, in 1967, I decided to retire or resign as a patrol officer and get ready to stand for the 1968 elections, 1968 House of Assembly elections.
Okay, looking back, how did those experiences as a Kia shape your outlook on development in Papua New Guinea?
Well, one of the critical things in my assessment of Papua New Guinea is when we first were sent to Oldspip. Okay, myself and Bob Hode was my senior patrol officer, and we were sent to build the airstrip and to convince the people they should stop killing and eating each other. As a matter of fact, the last cannibal raid recorded was the Christmas of 1963, before we went there we did the 1964 House of Assembly elections, and after that we went into Alsabib. So, it was one of the least penetrated areas of Papua New Guinea at the time, and people were definitely actively fighting each other. But when we went to Alsabib, we had to build the airstrip on the only plateau that was available to us to do it, because there's not much flat land around the Star Mountains, I can tell you. And anyway, we just arrived there for a week or so, and the interpreter, Imbum, came up to me with an old man with him, or old-looking man with him, and said, what's his name? Munal wants to talk with you. And I said, all right. So Munal then said, what are you building an airstrip here for? I said, because we can't find any other flat land. And he said, yeah, well, that's true. He said, but there's no food here. And I said, yeah, that's true, because there's no villages close by. And then he said, well, you're going to need gardens. And I said, yeah, that's true. Well, then he said, I'm the best gardener around here. So I said, you've got a job. And he said, no, I'm the best gardener, but I'll need 6 other people to do the work for me. So here we are, me, BA LLB filed from Sydney University, a magistrate and officer of Her Majesty's service, being led by the nose by a Papua New Guinean, right from the very beginning. So that convinced me that I was dealing with equal intellects or better. I came to Papua New Guinea with the premise that everybody was the same in the world, okay? But this man proved it clearly to me, and so that's one of the reasons that I believe in Papua New Guinea, because of that first experience.
Okay, can you tell me about your move into politics in 1968?
Well, at that stage, I was based at Lake Murray as a patrol officer in 1967, and I'd been the honorary advisor to the Lake Murray Bio Society, which was a cooperative that traded in crocodile skins. And at that time, crocodile skins were very valuable, so the cooperative had a lot of cash reserves. And so I was signed up as a manager of the cooperative for a 2-year contract, the year before I stood for election. And with the cooperative money, $450 as it was in those days, we bought from Itikinumu plantation the first rubber seeds to be planted in Lake Murray. And so that's the stage at which I first took an interest in rubber, by trying to introduce the crop to Lake Murray. The government had already introduced it into Kianga and Balamo and South Fly, but they'd missed Lake Murray. So basically, with the crocodile skin money, we commenced the rubber industry in the Lake Murray.
Can you tell me about those days in the second House of Assembly in 1968?
Yes, at that stage, of course, there was already the Pangu Party, who were already pushing for independence, but there weren't many of them, and the rest of Parliament were against independence, to the extent that the main group of conservative Highlanders and coastal people called themselves the Independent Group, because they didn't want to use the word party because it was a dirty word, because Pango had associated it with independence. So, but within that independent group, there were 8 of us, led by Sir Julius. Donata Smoller, the Black Prince, was one of them. From Bougainville, John Poy and myself, Big Jim McKinnon was there. So 8 of us formed a study group. And we were studying the motions and the laws as a group, and preparing or even dividing up the work between ourselves. So, you know, one of us would do this motion. So we were, you know, cooperating at that stage, sort of thing. And whereas even then the Pangu people were being denoted as the angry young men, that's what they were called in those days, we considered ourselves the unangry young men. So there was that competition, if you like, between what became the PPP and Pangu from the very early days. As a matter of fact, I had the pleasure and pain of sitting right across the aisle from Sir Peter Luce, and so we were in you know, vigorous competition, for want of a better word, right from very early stage of my time in politics. And that's what I enjoy about politics and being a parliamentarian, is the competition. It's like warfare with words instead of weapons.
Mr. Dutton, you co-founded the People's Progress Party in 1969 with Sir Julius. What was your vision at that time for PNG's political future?
Well, at that stage, we formed our study group into the People's Progress Party officially in 1969, at the end of 1969. At the same time, the other members of the independent group were deciding that they were going to form what they called the Compass Party, which later became the United Party. And there was a bit of a race and competition within the To Be United Party among the planters, or as much as anything. And so John Watts, who was a very close friend, but from the Highlands, a coffee grower, he rang me up because I was in Moresby and said, "Warren, would you please register the Compass Party with the Registrar General?" And so I did, but I had to register it in my own name. So at that stage, I was the registered nominee of both the People's Progress Party and the Compass Party, but I handed it over when John came to town, and then quite soon after that they changed their names to the United Party.
So what do you remember most vividly about the lead up to independence in 1975 as an MP representing the North Fly?
Well, it was the fact that the People's Progress Party and the United Party had a pre-election agreement that we would not stand candidates against each other, the candidates, because we had the intention of being a coalition government in the 1972 Parliament, sort of thing. So that's how we went to the election. Unfortunately, a couple of the planters in the United Party disobeyed Teobal and the executive of the United Party's direction, and because Sir Julius and myself had upset at least one of these people in Parliament, these two were not, in particular, were not too pleased about Sir Julius and I, so they decided that they'd ignore Teobal's direction and stand a candidate against me and a candidate against Sir Julius. To stand a candidate against me, they flew out to Kiunga and just went to Kiunga and said, "Who's standing against Warren here?" And my very good friend Sam Wingan, who was the interpreter that helped me to learn Please Moto, and a very good friend, he said, "Oh, I'm standing against Warren." So they took his photo and then went away and made posters, and then they came and airdropped them over the villages. Now, I lost the 1972 elections, but it wasn't because of that. It was because I hadn't spent enough time back in the electorate, because I'd been concentrating on doing the development of the People's Progress Party. In Sir Julius's case, the People's Progress Party in New Britain stood Perry Kwan against Wally Lussick, and Perry Kwan won, sort of thing. So effectively, when it came to the time for deciding who was to be the chief minister, under the previously agreed agreement, Taya Bal, who was a very modest man, offered Sir Julius to support him as chief minister in a coalition between the United Party and the People's Progress Party. And at the same time, of course, the Pangu Party were also trying to bring the People's Progress Party on their side, because the People's Progress Party had the second largest number of votes, perhaps the third, after United Party, then Pangu, and then People's Progress Party. So we were the significant numbers to decide who was going to be Chief Minister. Unfortunately, in my view, Sir Julius himself was too modest and didn't accept Sir Taya's offer. Well, he wasn't Sir Taya then, Taya Bal's offer, and decided that he would support Michael. Now, the same people who were annoyed with us had also been annoyed with Thomas Cavalli, and they acted in Parliament, I believe, improperly against him. So he split off from the United Party, formed the National Party with Yambaki Okok and others, and of course they made the other necessary numbers to form the government to support Michael's chieftainship, sort of thing. But it was very traumatic for a lot of our PPP members because all of them had gone to their election and told their people that they would not vote for independence, because Marlem, I can assure you, the majority of people were not in agreement with Pangu at the time of the election. Now, but the most extreme example was Corium Urukit. He was a former Kaga cult leader from Kokopo, and he was a bit of advanced age, and I was not in Parliament, but I was the secretary of the People's Progress Party, so I was in amongst everything that was going on. And Corium was telling me he couldn't sleep at night because he was worrying that he was going to, disappoint his voters and all the rest of it. But on the day of the vote, he was sitting in Parliament waiting for the Speaker to arrive. Suddenly, he stood up. He thumped the desk extremely hard, ran out the back door of the old Parliament House, and myself and another PPP supporter, we chased him all the way down the road to Defence Force House before we caught up with him. And unfortunately, the pressure on him was such that he had a nervous breakdown, and he spent a week in Ward 8 recovering from it. So this was the pressures that were on the members of Parliament at that stage to make that very crucial decision. And they were so conscious of what they were doing, one way or the other, whether they were for or against it, that it was a very, very genuine debate, competition, but very genuine feelings and beliefs on both sides.
Mr. Dutton, you say you lost in 1972. So what did you do during those 5 years until 1977?
No, well, for 4 years I was secretary of the People's Progress Party, right, and executive officer to John Poy, right, who was Minister for Police at one stage, or ministerial member for police at one stage, and then Minister for Home Affairs and that sort of thing after that. So I was in the midst of all this, and I was in the midst as an advisor, agitator, you might say, throughout all the constituent assembly discussions on the form of the Constitution and as well. And one of the things which I was believed, and which the People's Progress Party I believe, was we needed to keep as much of the Westminster system and parliamentary form of government as we could, and also at that stage the clauses on decentralisation, provincial government, were actually removed from the draft of the Constitution before it was passed, and had to be put back in again by the First Amendment of the Constitution later, when then Father Momus was able to convince the Chief Minister Michael Samari that it should go back in again. But in the Constituent Assembly, it was after a lot of consideration removed from the first draft. And the basic reason for doing that was because everybody was focusing on uniting. It was all boom one time, ahebo, unite. It was, everybody was focusing on that, and the view was, rightly or wrongly, that having decentralisation and provincial government there was going to be divisive rather than uniting. So that was the rationale of why it was removed, consciously by a vote of the members of the Constituent Assembly.
Okay, you came back in 1977. Can you tell me about your time in Parliament since from 1977 until when did you?
87 was when I lost.
10 years.
Next 10 years.
Experiences over the next 10 years from 1977 to 1987.
Yeah, well, of course, in 1977, again, there was a negotiated coalition between Pango and People's Progress Party, and at that stage, Bruce Jeffcott became Minister for Transport and led on to it. But because the PPP didn't have a space in the coalition for another white minister, if you like, I got the honour of being the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Fortunately, at that stage, myself, Paul Torato, who is the deputy chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, did travel down to Canberra to learn about how they did parliamentary works in Canberra. And while we were there, the Speaker agreed to second to us the man that had just retired as Secretary of the Public Accounts Committee in the Federal Parliament. So he came up and he worked with us for, it might have been 9 months or a year. And because of the formality and the planning that he was able to bring to us, he made our committee look very good. Because before we had a committee meeting, there would have been questionnaires going out to all the departments, answers coming back, what's the name, follow-up questions, all before we got to the meeting. And when we sit in the meeting, in front of me was my questions to ask who it was, whoever it was, and ask this question. If he answers this way, ask this second question. I mean, it was a script that was, made us, I think, much more professional than we could otherwise possibly have done. But that was an essential. And after he went, and other public accounts committees have not had those services, I don't think the Public Accounts Committee has been the shadow of what it used to be at that time.
Right. As Justice Minister, what were your biggest challenges and achievements in building PNG's legal and governance institutions?
Well, one of the best things I did was sit on the Judicial Services Committee, or whatever, chair of the committee, which appointed Saburi Kidu as our first Chief Justice, because I still believe he was the best. Okay, so that was an important decision that we made. The other thing was that I got the Papua New Guinea Lawyers Society Disciplinary Act passed through Parliament. And when that was brought into force, in the first year, there were 2 complaints on average every day against lawyers that went to the disciplinary committee. So even then, lawyers were to be complained against, sort of thing. And at that stage, of course, most of the lawyers were expatriate lawyers, etc. But when I had been in Australia, I had been an article clerk, and I'd even delivered a brief to Sir Garfield Barwick, who became the Attorney General of Australia, and thereafter the one of the judges of the High Court of Australia, sort of thing. So, my firm was dealing with important quick QCs. Well, the richest or premier QC in the whole British Commonwealth at that stage was Sir Garfield Barwick. He wasn't a good politician, by the way, but just as an example of how things used to be in Australia and how I believe they should be in Papua New Guinea and Australia again, is that Sir Garfield had completed his first career. Okay, he had reached the pinnacle of it. Okay, at that stage, he was on £100,000 brief fees a year. That's just the money that's under the pink tape when you open it. What on top of that, whatever. So he was getting an extremely large income. When he decided that he wanted to become Attorney General, he knew that the salary for Attorney General was £10,000 per year. So, having no real need for money, he was prepared to take such a huge salary cut because he wanted the glory, the power, or the responsibility of leading the country. Okay. Subsequently, in Australia and in Papua New Guinea, but more particularly in Australia in the first instance, politics has become a career where young politicians come up through the party machinery with no previous experience in anything real, the real world of governing, business or other service or anything like that. And unfortunately, they still have young families who they've got to put through school and university, and they need the money, okay? Or they think they need their money. And so in Australia, as in Papua New Guinea, the money of politics is more important than the power and the responsibility that goes with it. And I'm sure in Australia, and I'm equally sure in Papua New Guinea, that the quality of people elected have changed because the emphasis has been changed so much from service and power, because they go together. You can't say that politicians are doing it really completely for the good of the country. They're doing it for their own power and that sort of thing. But it's changed from that objective to the need to be able to support your family through its growing stages. And this is critical because the principle of absolute ministerial responsibility which existed before, which meant that if a minister's department did something seriously wrong, the minister resigned and accepted the responsibility. Now, in Australia, as in Papua New Guinea, there's always excuses why the minister should stay and somebody else should be the scapegoat. And to me, that is a critical deficiency in governments in Australia, Papua New Guinea, England, everywhere. It just seems to me to be part of the cycle of the decline of democracy throughout the world.
Mr. Dutton, you were deeply involved in the Octedi discussions. What lessons should PNG learn today from the resources debate of that time?
Look, I definitely think that Papua New Guinea had a better negotiating team than we do these days, better qualified. I mean, there were more experienced expatriates in mining department and economic departments and that sort of thing. I was not involved, but I was watching. I was there while it was happening. And the Papua New Guinea negotiating team had, I think, perhaps 10 or 12 people on each side. The mining companies on the other side had at least twice that number. And what I noticed very quickly was where our team were trying to negotiate for the best thing for the country and and a fair deal for the mining company, the negotiators on the company side were competing with each other to win an extra point for the company, not because it was equitable or anything, but just to to get the company more of it. And so the negotiations really needed people on our side that understood the motivation of the people on the other side, whose motivation is primarily for themselves and their career within their company. Okay, they're doing the best for the company for their career. I believe that in so many negotiations since Octedi, Papua New Guinea has been out-negotiated extremely.
Okay, we'll come to reflections on 50 years of independence. Papua New Guinea celebrates 50 years of independence in just over 2 weeks from now. Having been part of the nation's journey from the beginning, how do you personally reflect on this milestone?
Look, it's wonderful we've come so far, and we have come further than most people expected. Most people expected we would collapse like a lot of the Africans did very, very well, very quickly. But we didn't in the early stages because, as I said previously, the focus of the members, in my mind, was much more firmly on their people and developing, and this unitedness. The focus was, as I said, boom one time, ahebo, unite. Okay, that was the focus. And that led to an upward movement in everything at that stage. Slowly, because we were under-resourced and all that. You've never, ever got enough resources. As a matter of fact, one of the observations that I made to myself at that time, that as a minister, every decision that you made was a zero-sum decision, okay? There was nothing that you could do with the limited resources you had which was positive overall. Because if you decided that you were going to build a hospital in Roomganay, close to the Awan and Ningram people, that means you couldn't build it in Moorhead because you didn't have the money. So the Roomganay people had their life expectancy expanded by a few years because of the extra fill. The Moorhead people were going to continue to die at the same traditional rate. So that whatever you did, you were making decisions that helped one side and disadvantaged to a greater or lesser degree the other side. So without the sort of resources that Papua New Guinea has flowing into it these days, at that time government and governing was a much more practical question of what can we do with what we've got, and not all ministers, of course, thought the same way, and but I believe the majority of the ministers, even without the education that I was blessed with, instinctively knew this fact.
What do you think Papua New Guinea has achieved most successfully in the past half century?
Educating our people, because that's the most important thing. We certainly haven't done it particularly well as we could have, but we have done it quite well. The problem now is, of course, that our population is growing so fast that the resources available per person are being reduced all the time. It's a downhill slide these days, which makes government much more difficult, even if governments weren't concentrating on impressive projects that you can cut the ribbon for and announce that you're spending millions of kina building, if you like, a new building or another new road, etc., etc. Rather than focusing on getting services to the people. Look, I can tell you, especially in Kianga, how the difference can be seen. When Richard Jackson, who was Professor of Geography at Sydney PNG, you may have known of him, he did the definitive study on the North Bay area ahead of Octedi. Okay? When he did the study, he found the figures from the Montgomery Health Centre, which the Catholic Church ran, that the average age at death for people along the highway between Kianga and the mine site was 29 for males and 16 for females. And this was because endemic malaria was compounded by endemic malnutrition, and in most of the village populations that I was censusing as a patrol officer, the population was static or growing very slowly because there just wasn't enough food for people to do better, much more better than survival. Then Octedi comes along, and with that there's money which allows people to buy tin fish and rice, lamb flaps, etc., etc. So in a very short period, the population of the highway people has at least quadrupled, probably quintupled by now. The average life expectancy went into the high 50s, all because of the better nutrition. It wasn't the medical services that made the difference, it was the better nutrition. And if a young girl, the average lifespan of a young girl is 16, that means most are not reaching puberty, therefore there's no chance for them to bear children and etc. So that's what holds it back. Once you get past that and you get the girls into childbearing age, that's when the population explodes, literally, and that's when Papua New Guinea's problems really gets exacerbated. But that's what happened, and in the Kianga area, and everybody immediately became, not everybody, but too many people immediately became morbidly obese, started suffering for heart attacks, kidney diseases, all the rest of it. So they started dying not from malnutrition or malaria, they started dying from lifestyle diseases. But in the last few years, the standard of living has dropped because prices have gone up so much that people that 3 or 4 years ago, individual people that I knew who were fat in those days, are back to their village thinness. Okay, so there's been a regression. Now, in some ways, they're better, slimmer, if you like, but some of them are beginning to look as gaunt as they first were when I first went there in 1962. So this is, we've gone a long way, but we're approaching a trough. We're on the downslide into a trough. I can't say anything else. Now, every country goes through this, so it's not a Papua New Guinea thing, but what Papua New Guinea's got to do is find ways to get up out of that trough and renew its ascent up the hill.
So where do you feel the country has fallen short, particularly in terms of governance, infrastructure and rural development?
Okay, firstly, we politicised the public service and therefore virtually destroyed it. Okay, look, Sir Michael's government, Sir Julius's government, even Pius's government, we were served by professional public service. Okay, I mean, all the work was done for us ministers. I mean, we directed policy to some degree, not completely. We've got to be realistic of where, the realities of where power is between the public service and the politicians. But, we had good service from the public servants. Okay, therefore we were able to govern, in my view, better than we're being governed at present. Okay, but even between the time I was Minister for Police and 2.5 years later when I was Minister for Justice, the quality of briefing and advice that I got from the Justice Department, which was all the professional lawyers, was actually less than I was getting from the Police Department. Okay, and so being Minister for Justice was marginally more difficult than ministering police and that sort of thing. But in my view, the public service has been done a grave disservice by being politicised. Okay, they should have been allowed to remain neutral and bipartisan as they were and they should be, because that's actually a better support for both government and opposition than public service that is merely serving the people that happen to be there at the time. So that's how I see the downgrading of that. The other thing is that Parliament is not acting as vigorously as it used to. Even uneducated members held the government to much more better account, okay, than this Parliament is now, and for quite a few parliaments past. Okay, they are just not following the standing orders. The standing orders say that a bill should be distributed 21 days before the second reading to give members the time to read it, but more importantly, to give members, those that are interested, the chance to discuss it with their friends, with their professional advisors, so that the members can handle the legislation and amend it or or stop it or improve it in Parliament. It's become the norm for the minister presenting the bill to, I move the same, and I ask leave to move to the second reading forthwith, and it's carried on the voices. Okay, so we were sitting in the Parliament the other day in the Speakers Gallery. That we 8 survivors of the 1972 Parliament who were invited by the clerk for the 41st anniversary of the opening. We were sitting in there. And I don't know about the others, but I wanted to jump over the rail and get amongst them and shake them and say, "Get up and do something! Don't just sit there!" and use the standing orders, because it was apparent the Minister for Justice was bringing on a bill. I'm not quite sure what it was, because the sound system or my hearing aids were not getting it. But I could see the attendants were delivering that bill on the desks of the members as the minister was speaking to it. Some of them put it aside, didn't even open it. Some were, but there's no way they were voting for something that they knew the content of. Okay, now that's what's the name? Dereliction of duty, as far as I'm concerned, for a member of Parliament. Okay, and the thing is, as I was explaining to people again, one of the most enjoyable times that I had when we were first in Parliament, it must have been 77, no, it must have been 80, after the PPP had moved out of Michael's government, but before we won the third vote of no confidence to make Julius Prime Minister. So we were in opposition, sort of thing. And Barry Holloway was bringing his budget in. And at that stage, the budget was always moved into committee and considered in committee stage clause by clause. Okay, it doesn't happen anymore, I see. Okay, but that's how it used to be done properly, in my view. So, me being me, I had, I think, 3 or 4 clauses on which I wished to speak. Okay, so when my first clause got up, I stood to speak, and I'd open my mouth, and Peter Luce, in a friendly, jocular way, but also to save time so they could pass the budget more quickly, put the question before I could speak, you see. So the Speaker said, the ayes voted, the ayes have it. So, I'm a bit cross. So I say division. And my good friend Glover says second. So the bells ring for 3 minutes. All the members from their offices have to come in. Okay, we get defeated on the numbers, of course. All the members go back to their offices, and then they have to vote on the clause. Again, the Speaker says the ayes have it, and I'm still cross. So I say division. Climie says second. Okay. And so the bells ring again for 3 minutes. The members come back. We get outvoted. Glymia and I had a ball. We kept the Parliament there, the 2 of us, by calling division and a second. Sometimes Glymia called division. Sometimes I seconded. Sometimes others sort of wanted to get in a second or something like that. We kept them there till 8 o'clock the next morning. 2 of us using the standing orders. That's what the standing orders are for, to protect the opportunity to debate, so that the government can't overrule the minority excessively. They've got the votes to do it, but if you are bloody minded enough, like Glenn and I were, you can do that. And eventually everybody enjoyed it, even the government sort of thing. They started sleeping on the benches because it wasn't worthwhile walking back to their office. But to me, that was a very enjoyable episode of demonstrating how an opposition can work and should work if the government is being oppressive. Okay, you just don't have to say, oh, they break the rules, yeah, and we can't do anything about it. Two people, if they're bloody minded enough, can do it. That's what our Constitution and our standing orders allows us to do.
Okay, Mr. Dutton, we'll come to your thoughts for the next 50 years.
I wish I was going to be here because, Papua New Guinea's trajectory has got to be upward. Okay, slowly with depressions and all that, you can't avoid that, but it will continue to be upward as our population gets better and better educated. Okay, that is a big factor. But what I'm pleased about now is because Australia has finally decided to be scared of China, Australia is once again beginning to pay enough attention to Papua New Guinea. Okay, my view, and I've said this right from the start, was that Whitlam abdicated Australia's responsibility to Papua New Guinea. Okay, I don't believe we got independence. I believe Whitlam abdicated Australia's responsibility. Now, I'm Liberal and Whitlam was Labor, so I'm biased, but I think he did that in lots of other ways as well, because he was, in my view, thought he knew everything. Okay, very brainy, very intellectual, but they're the worst kinds. Dealing with simple people who see things straight is much more productive than dealing with geniuses sometimes. And this is, so Julius's genius is doing the work. He always did the work. As I said in my speech at the unveiling of the 100 Kina note, Sir Julius, Lady Chan told me, was working up until 2 days before he died. Right up to 2 days before he died. He is the hardest working Prime Minister we've ever had. I know of mistakes that he made that other people don't know of, okay? But he did the work to govern the country, and he used the public service and that sort of thing, and insisted that they do the job as much as possible. So, the attention to detail and the concentrated hard work is much more important for developing our country than brilliant politics or whatever other sort of politics. The politics is just how you get yourself in the position to do it, or miss out on being in the position to do it. But once you're in the position, you can't do it hard unless you devote yourself to hard work. And Sir Julius, in my view, did that better than anybody else has. And as I also said in my speech, he sacrificed so much of his family life by devoting, you could say, almost an excessive amount of his time to work. Okay? Whether I agree with all he did, well, I mean, I didn't. I mean, just one example. When Yambaki went over to Canada and bought the -7s, he did that without Cabinet being even advised or something. So me being me, in the People's Progress Caucus, suggested that, well, he needs to be disciplined, Sir Julius, okay? Even though he's Deputy Prime Minister, if he acts like that, he needs to be disciplined. I argued very strongly for that in caucus, but I was overruled, so he wasn't disciplined. But there's other stories I could tell you about that if you had the time. I believe Sir Julius has made a mistake by not disciplining him. Okay, I mean, it wasn't a terribly big mistake, but for good governance, it was a mistake. Again, as I said the other night, I believe that Sir Julius sacked for cause more ministers than any other Prime Minister has done yet, sort of thing. And we all know that there are always a reasonable percentage of ministers who deserve to be sacked because they've done the wrong thing, okay? But they seldom get sacked, not only here in Papua New Guinea, but that's the point I'm making about Australia as well. You know, this absolute responsibility of ministers for their own mistakes and their department mistakes is essential to good governance as far as I'm concerned. And that's where it starts, at the top. It's not down amongst the third-ranking public servants. It starts at the top. And Sir Julius's insistence on punctuality and discipline and being prepared to sack more ministers than anybody else, you know, is the meat, as I see it, of why his prime ministership were very, very productive, really.
So what are the most pressing risks Papua New Guinea must address if it is to prosper, whether in resource management, law and order, or education?
Well, education, you know, it's got to catch up again with the population growth and get in front of it, because we're falling behind it, okay? Look, before independence, before the Indonesians took over West Papua, the Dutch had a policy of educating an elite, okay? People from Bosset, people from Bosset, just across the border from West Papua, they went for education in Amsterdam, you know, before the 60s, okay, because the Dutch were choosing people to create an elite, okay, whereas Australia's approach was you educate everybody at the primary level. You know, you hadn't even got too many high schools at that stage, of course, but you were educating as many as possible at the primary level as a base, okay, so it's a contrast in how it was done. Now, you know, the OPM was started, and the problems were started by the elite. And now, I'm sorry to say, my view is a lot of our elite in Papua New Guinea form a great part of our problem. I don't think our ordinary people are, even the ones who are acting illegally and riotously and criminally viciously, even those are education of everybody, okay? Because you don't know who's going to be a genius, okay? And we need to get our geniuses there. I mean, this Munal I talked about, you know, he was so smart, you know, I considered him in a genius class, uneducated, but intellectually, he was more than my equal. Sam Wingan, who stood against me, he was of the same mental ability. The wife of my houseboy, she had the same ability to learn everything that geniuses have. And they're there throughout Papua New Guinea, although these days, too many of them seek employment overseas. We have such a brain drain of good people because, you know, we're not making Papua New Guinea comfortable enough for them here. I mean, just as I came in from Kianga, one of the young chaps came up to talk to me because he recognised me. Now, he was from Altabip, where I went first in 60. His grandfather was a practising cannibal, okay? He's been working as a driller in Laos for the last 8 or 9 years, okay? He got trained by one of the Octedi drilling companies, but he had the ability to do that. And, you know, going back even further, when I first arrived in Daru, there was a man that chartered a plane from Thursday Island to come to Daru. He threw a week of lavish parties, then chartered a plane to fly back to Thursday Island. So I had a chance to talk to him. And I said, you know, how can you afford to do this? He said, "Oh, I was working on the railways in Western Australia." I said, "How did you work on the railway?" He said, "Oh, well, I went from Daru down to Cairns, then I got a job with the Queensland Railway, and we had a good team of a mixture of Kiwis and Torres Strait Islands, and we were a good team, so we were taken across to Western Australia, and we broke world records of the existing world records of laying railway track." Okay, so he was very, very well paid. But I mean, this is 1960, when I was going to tell people, well, to be the catalyst for people to decide not to eat each other anymore. Okay, so that was the difference between Daru, which had 75 years head start, on Ultramip. Okay, but Papua New Guineans have been individuals have spread throughout the world. One man who was the first pupil in Lake Murray's primary school, he was the head of UNICEF in Bangkok for years and years and years. I mean, all these people have had the ability to go anywhere in the world to do it, whereas we really do need them here to help us. But I mean, you've got to allow them to be able to do it. But, we've got to recognise that the brain drain that we're losing.
If you were advising today's younger generation of leaders, what would be your single most important piece of advice?
I would be advising leaders at grassroots level to form parties, real parties on the ground, to support their members, but more importantly, to control their members. Okay, because what has happened regularly, even since '68, as soon as Papuans or New Guinea coastal people who live in less dense populations, etc., as soon as they arrived in Parliament, within a very short time, they were met and greeted and made friends of by Highlanders. Okay, who bought them drinks, introduced them to their daughters or their sisters, etc., and effectively took control of them by their testicles. You might better not put that on there, but effectively that's what it is. I mean, I also saw it when I was Minister of Police touring the police barracks in the Highlands. Every Highland policeman who wasn't married had a young Highland girl there looking after him. Now, it wasn't her idea, it was her father's idea to grease this policeman for the father's benefit, okay? Let's be realistic about these things, because that's traditional Highland politics before anybody ever penetrated the Highlands, before Jim Taylor or Meg's father, Dame Meg's father ever got there. That was their politics, whereas the politics of sparsely populated Papua and Western Province in particular is totally different, and it's not aggressive in the same way at all. Okay, so, but the thing is, virtually every member of North Thigh, and I'm not quite sure about James Donald, I don't know what's happened to him, but I don't think he has suffered the same syndrome, but every member for North Thigh after me has very quickly come back with a Southern Highlands wife, very early in his term in Parliament. Okay, QED. It's deliberate, politics and legitimate if you're looking after your own people only instead of looking after the whole country. But for us, on the coast, and Kianga's not the coast, but in the lowlands and that sort of thing, we've got to realise that the people, and everywhere actually, we've got to realise that people have got to control the party. I mean, I was in the Young Liberals as soon as I left school, because, as I said, I wanted to be... Did I tell you I wanted to be Prime Minister of Australia? That was my ambition. So I joined the Young Liberals. The Young Liberals were more famous for the parties than the parties, so that was good fun as well. I was on the selection committee that selected candidates for the elections in Australia. Okay, and on the selection committee, it was harder to get chosen as a candidate than it was to get elected to Parliament, because you had the party behind you to get you elected to Parliament, but the battle to get chosen as a candidate was the critical thing. Okay, so because that's where it was done, because each branch member was pushing his own candidate, and so the candidates had to appear before the committee, give their speech, and then each branch member would ask questions. Of course, you'd ask good questions to make your man look good, and you'd ask hard questions to make the other men look bad. So it was a trial by debate that before they even got what's his name, and that's how you get quality, not by buying votes or anything else like that. So we really need a real party system, not something that is cobbled together of groups of independent members who call themselves a party in that thing. We've got to have real parties. I tried very hard, and I had signed up a couple of thousand or more members of the People's Progress Party bands in Kiunga. $2 a card it cost them. For the 87 elections. Didn't work for me, unfortunately. But I mean, I was concentrating on trying to build up that grassroots party, and you really need the party branches to be able to support but then also control the members. They can't be just left there to do everything by themselves, because the attempts to seduce them one way or the other will be unending once they get to Parliament.
One last question.
Okay.
When Papua New Guinea celebrates 100 years of independence in 50 years from now, in 2075, what would you hope the country has become?
I think more mature, okay? And that's the direction it's going. But it's got to concentrate on lifting everybody, from the most remote village to the most urban dweller, as close as possible to the same level of opportunity. You can't make people equal, but we do have to give them the opportunity to be equal, or to better themselves, and that is the sign of a good country. And worldwide, I think in Australia as well as America and England, this is not happening. The gap between the poor in Australia and as it is in Papua New Guinea and America and England is widening, and this will eventually be disastrous to the country. Okay, if it's not corrected and we don't concentrate on lifting up the lower end of our economy, our people at the lower end of our economy, closer to the middle rank sort of thing. Most of them don't aspire to being any higher than middle. Those that want to aspire higher, will still be able to do so, but they've got to do it with the support of the people that they've raised up, rather than standing on the heads of the people that they've pushed down. And if Papua New Guinea can achieve that, that will be what I hope for.
Now, one thing that has slipped my mind, but I just thought about it now. Western province is often referred to as being so rich and yet so poor, given that the Octary mine is there, which has produced billions of kina for the country, but yet
It's
Western
because
province is so poor.
it's so big. It's more than twice as big as the next biggest province. I mean, since I've been out of Parliament, I've been honorary chairman of North Bay Rubber for the last 30 years, and we have a boat called the Cuckoo. It's the third boat of the same name called the Cuckoo, but it travels around the rivers and the lakes buying rubber. Now, to sail from the factory at Kianga to Ali up the Aramea River to collect rubber from the furthest village is 1,400 river kilometres. And it's 1,400 river kilometres back. Okay? So, that is the difficulty of trying to do anything commercially. The logistic costs are so great because of the distances involved and the sparsity of the population. Now, it's the most difficult province to develop. Now, I'm sure if I had been elected all these years, it would be far further advanced than it is now, but it still would have been very, very difficult, and it would still not be as good as the more favoured provinces who are on the coast, got short communication lines. I mean, Manus, what a wonderful province to have to govern. It's a few islands, so easy to do, etc., etc. The Western Province is huge. The thing is, the Western Province has always been difficult to survive in. Okay, that's why the population is so sparse. Okay, and that's why it's so difficult to develop. But of course, there is this other factor that too many of our politicians have been seduced by the bright lights and the big money in the towns and associated with the towns, and they haven't focused on their electorates and their remote people as much as they should have. And these days it's all infrastructure, but our rubber industry after 30 years is at a critical stage, okay? I won't go into that because that'll take another 2 days to talk to you about that. But that's why the Western Province is, as they say, so poor, because it's so big and so difficult.
One last thing, what are your wishes for Papua New Guinea as we celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2 weeks' time?
Look, my most immediate wish is for the renewal of responsible parliamentary government. Doesn't matter who is in the executive, which party or which coalition of parties, the executive must use the constitutional and the constitution and the standing orders to govern as they're supposed to govern, and the opposition must come alive and do its job, because in so many ways oppositions are more important than governments. My view of the responsibility of politicians is that we are elected to make the people's mistakes for them, okay? And we do make mistakes, but if there's nobody saying, hey, think twice about that, we're going to make a lot more mistakes and cause much more damage than if you've got an opposition saying, hey, think about that, you you people. An opposition is not about necessarily gaining power. It's about on a daily basis vetting everything that comes before Parliament to point out the small mistakes. To point out the small mistakes that the government has overlooked and will 9 times out of 10 agree to correct. Okay, that's what we're losing. Look, the expropriation of the Western Province people's shares in Octedi by Peter O'Neill was passed by Parliament in the same process I told you, okay, without the members reading it. Okay, Sir Julius and Sir Michael both walked out and abstained on voting for it. The 4 members of the Western Province, there were 4 of them, they voted for it without realising what was really happening. And at least a couple of ministers I spoke to said, oh, Warren, I didn't know that. I didn't read it. The minister said, I didn't read it. I mean, he must have had it pushed in front of him in the NEC to start with, but he told me he hadn't read it, and they voted on it. If 6 people had voted against it, it wouldn't have happened. Okay? And, I'm very passionate about this because Octedi was a foundation partner of North Wairarapa. At that expropriation, Octedi was taken away from us, and their support, not completely, but their support have been important in helping 10,000 new farmers plant rubber, okay, in the Western Province. And at the same time, sustainable support was taken away from the rubber of the Western Province. The North Wairarapa just signed a 10-year agreement with PNG Sustainable Development for 44 million kina for North Wairarapa to manage over 10 years to help the Ballamo people plant an extra 2,800 hectares of rubber, to build a second rubber factory at Sturt Island in the mouth of the Fly River. None of that's happened, and now the rubber industry in the Western Province, and I also believe in the whole of Papua, is in a crisis stage because the world price is so down and other problems that the processing of rubber in Papua New Guinea is in a crisis, and that's stemmed from the fact that Octedi moved away because of the expropriation, and Sustainable at that stage didn't have the funds to, and so they reneged on the agreement with North Wairarapa. They reneged on a 44 million kina agreement. Okay, North Wairarapa had managed for Octedi and Sustainable 29 million kina to help 10,000 new farmers plant rubber. Okay, we'd proved ourselves that North Wairarapa could do it, and to the extent that Sustainable under its previous management had bet 44 million kina on our capability, and that was taken away by that expropriation. If 6 people, or perhaps it's only 4 people, had voted differently in Parliament, no, not 4, because our own members, well, not I say 5 or 6 members, it wouldn't have happened. Okay, we wouldn't have had to sack 73 extension officers, rubber extension officers, throughout the Western Province, if 2 or 3 more members of Parliament had read that expropriation bill and voted against it. Okay, that's the accident of history that has done, I think, irreparable damage to the Western Province rubber growers. And almost half the population of the Western Province has committed themselves to plant rubber. Octedi provided 29 million kina of cash. The people provided 60 million kinas worth of sweat equity to do the work that was needed. And all that's, wasted, or close to wasted, although we've struggled on until now, because 3 or 4 members didn't spend the time to think whether or not the state should expropriate from the people of the Western Province, not from BHP, not from the Germans, not from the Canadians. They expropriated the money from the citizens of the Western Province. It was unconstitutional, clearly unconstitutional. There was no fair compensation given, which is, one of the sections of the Constitution. Look, so you got time for me to, what's the name? At the time, Sir McCary was chairman of Sustainable, and we were working close because we were spending 44 million kina of their money, and they were watching that we had to report them every 3 months how we were doing it. Okay, and I said to him, look, McCary, your funding of dividends from Octedi have been cut off because of this expropriation, because of shares that were entrusted to Sustainable, which were expropriated. The beneficiaries were the people of the Western Province, but the nominee holders were Sustainable. So, it was expropriation of citizens of Papua New Guinea's property. And I said to him, look, if you like, North Ferry Rubber will sue Sustainable for breach of this 44 million kina agreement, okay? And then you'll have a cause to go to the court to, challenge the constitutionality of this bill. Unfortunately, now this is my biased interpretation, Sustainable were advised at that time by too many white Australian lawyers who got too much business from the government, and they advised him not to do it. I mean, that is a very biased opinion of mine, and it may not be exactly the case, but subsequently, McCary did go to the Supreme Court seeking locus standi to be able to challenge the constitutionality of it, and a single judge denied him and said he couldn't have it. And Nemo Yalo, you know Nemo, okay, well I know him quite well as, from my days in justice and all the rest of it. His view was that was not a proper legal judgment, it was a political judgment. That's what he told me. So, an opportunity to redress them was stopped at that level. But it should never happen if members of Parliament had, with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 members of Parliament had studied the bill close enough and come to the conclusion that they should vote against it. Because it required an absolute majority. I'm not sure whether it was simple absolute or greater, but, it wasn't an easy bill, too easy to pass. So, that's we need a Parliament that doesn't let that happen very often, or makes it happen less often, and that can only be if we have an energetic opposition, an opposition that's prepared to lose and lose and try again and lose again and try again and lose again. If they're not prepared to do that, they're not worthy of the name of an opposition. And the whole point is, it's really good fun when you're doing it, well, from my point of view anyway. And Sir Julius used to enjoy it, and Glomera also. We had more fun in opposition than we did in government.
Anything else you want to say?
Oh, a lot, but I think that's enough, don't you? Thank you very much, Nalam.
Just a bit, 1 minute, just last question. Just tell me, where were you born, what year?
Oh, where was I born?
I
I was born in Gladesville in Sydney in 1938, on the 12th of December 1938, 8 months before Sir Julius was born. Okay.
Tell me about your early years of schooling. And
Well, Dad was in the bank, so we moved all over the New South Wales as he went promoted and that sort of thing. But he also had 2 years in the Royal Air Force ground crew, because his eyes were bad, in London during the Second World War. So we had myself and my brother and my sister, sorry, who was born after Dad left, had no father for 2.5 years, and I lived in a matriarchal house that had a great-grandmother, a grandmother, and all women. There was one man, but it was matriarchal. And the critical thing, if you like, for not in a joking way, but it's critical about me, my development, is my great-grandmother used to sell kitchen chairs over the back fence to buy grog because she was unfortunately an alcoholic. So all the rest of the ladies, enforced in me, in my 5 to 8 years age period, that beer was bad, see. So I don't drink beer even today, and I didn't even start drinking wine until well into my 20s and that sort of thing, because of that young indoctrination. When my father came back from the war, he drank moderately. So all my other siblings, they drink. They also smoke. But my other grandfather, when I was 5, taught me to do the drawback and told me to really do it. And of course, I did it so well that it knocked me on the ground. I keeled over. And when I got up, I never had to do that again. How many $1,000s do you think that saved me over my lifetime that I haven't wasted on cigarettes? So, they seem like simple things, but, they do, tempt you in a direction. And then politically, of course. And look, I will confide in you one other critical thing. Because my father was away in the war and I was that age, I knew every Air Force's aeroplanes, the Germans, the Japs, the Australians, the Americans. I study it because my father was in the Air Force. And I naturally am a militarist. I believe in the army and that sort of thing. So I joined the cadets at school, of course. When I went to university, I joined the Sydney University Regiment. And then I got called up for national service, and I ended up as having qualified to be a lieutenant, but I needed to do a camp as a substantive sergeant in order to be commissioned. I'd only done a camp as a acting sergeant, so I couldn't get commissioned when I decided to come to Papua New Guinea. When I got to Moresby and they posted me to Daru, I did my best to establish a platoon of the PNG volunteer rifles in Daru, so that I could be the sergeant and become eventually get my commission. You see, so that's my background as a militarist, but. To me, citizenship of Australia involved being prepared to fight for Australia. As a matter of fact, when I was in Daru and the Korean War started, I volunteered to go to Korea as in the army sort of thing. They wouldn't let me go because they said, no, your job as a patrol officer in Papua New Guinea is more important than you as a foot soldier in Vietnam, so I didn't get to Korea, which is good. I'm pleased I didn't. Quite a good risk of being shot in Korea. But the point of this is, when I had to decide whether I wanted to be a citizen or not, and I wanted to be a citizen so I could, continue in politics, get re-elected as a politician. The critical decision I had to make was whether I was prepared to fight for Papua New Guinea. That's what I think citizenship is about. Okay, yes, it is a road to politics. It was never a road to business as far as I was concerned. But so that's the question I had to ask myself. But on the other side of citizenship, in '72, as I said, I was Executive Officer John Poe, and he was Minister for Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs included Foreign Affairs or something. So I got one of the very first cards issued by Papua New Guinea to go in and out of Papua New Guinea before passports and that sort of thing. But when I applied for citizenship immediately on independence, of course, but the Citizenship Advisory Committee just was not meeting. I mean, they had 100 other people on the list as well as me, and the committee wasn't meeting, and so it's getting close to the time when nominations were going to open for the 77 election, so I had to be a citizen in order to lodge. So I was getting a bit desperate, so I went to see Maori Kiki, who was the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and say, Minister, look, this is the situation. Your Citizenship Advisory Committee, which was chaired by Naipuri Minor, a Pangu man in the Western Province, and supported by Sir Ebia Alawali, not that he was Sir then, a Pangu, and they really didn't want another PPP candidate to be able to stand against them. So they were not in a hurry to hear my application. So I asked Sir Maori Kiki about it. He said, look, Warren, I don't have the power to make the committee to meet. I've made public press statements asking them to meet. They just won't meet. And I said, well, what can I do? He said, well, you better go and see Tony Siaguru, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. He's also Secretary of the Citizenship Advisory Committee. And so I went to see Tony. And of course, Tony was part of the Gang of Four that was negotiating on behalf of Michael in the formation of the original PPP and Pangu government, negotiating in the, what's the name? So he was very much Pangu sort of thing. So when I went to see Tony, he had a bit of a smirk on his face, and he said, oh, Warren, I can't get them to meet. I've tried to get them to meet. I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. And I said, well, Tony, if they don't meet by next Wednesday, I will be taking out a writ of mandamus to force them to meet to consider my application along with the others. Tony said, oh, Warren, if you do that, they'll hate their guts and they won't approve it. I said, Tony, you know me, I'm not going down without a fight. They met the next Wednesday. They approved my citizenship with reservations. Okay? So I knew immediately so I rang Maori Kiki up and I said, I understand that the committee has approved my or have recommended me to you with recommendations. And he said, yes, Warren. I said, those recommendations would be about Ningram Transport, the company that I had formed in 1969 with 29 villages as shareholders. He said, yes, how did you know that? I said, because Ebia and Naipuri have been bad-mouthing, saying that I've been stealing all the villagers' money for quite a while now, so I know what they're talking about. So I said, can I bring the company accounts in to show you? And the situation was that I started the company to carry gas bottles and drums of fuel on a tractor and trailer from Kanga to Ningram. And then when Kennicott pulled out in 72, there was 4 years when the company couldn't operate because, what's the name, Octedi Development or whatever it was, hadn't started up. So I'd been keeping the company alive from my salary as an executive officer of the minister. So as soon as I took the accounts in America, said, okay, Warren, you're a citizen. Sorry, I've got to run away now. I've got to go to cabinet. I said, I know my minister, John Poe, or my minister's in cabinet. So I went back to the office. 20 minutes later, John Poe rings me up, killing himself laughing. And I said, Minister, what are you laughing about? He said, Kiki came into cabinet just now. He came late, but he came into cabinet, and he announced, I've just granted Warren Dutton citizenship. Now, Julius and John Poey, two ministers of the government, were my sponsors, okay, and he said, everybody jumped up and he screamed at Mary Kiki, you can't do that, you can't do that. And he said, Mary said, sit down, Nebbia, I'm the Minister for Foreign Affairs, I've done it. So politics, we fought as hard as we could at every opportunity in those days, okay? It was not ladies' crochet or anything else. It was real politics which you had to win in, okay, if you were doing your job properly. And you had to be prepared to fight as not anyway as required, but as strongly as required. And I think that's enough of wasting your time.